What's up, everybody?
What's everyone?
We are back.
Welcome back. Like and subscribe, everyone.
Hit that notification bell.
Bell.
What else do people say? What's going on, everyone?
Selling bathwater, guys. We're doing a few. We're not doing a few. We're doing one story today. Joe Rogan. Okay.
So yeah, Joe Rogan. His latest podcast with Joe DeSena. He made some comments about playing video games. We're going to talk about it because everyone on Twitter is kind of blowing up about it, and I think that's time for the drop.
After the drop. The internet is melting down right now, okay? Because good old Joe Rogan, which loves to speak about all sorts of topics, has now weighed in on video games.
He's an eclectic man.
He's an eclectic man, he certainly is. But look, this is the clip. We'll roll it first so you can understand what we're actually talking about. Then we'll chat.
And video games are a real problem. They're a real problem. You know why? Because they're fucking fun.
Addictive.
And you don't, yeah, well, I have a real problem with them. And you do them, and they're real exciting, but you don't get anywhere.
Right.
It's like you could do like martial arts, right? You could learn jujitsu. You get obsessed by jiu-jitsu, and then 3 years later, you're like an elite jiu-jitsu athlete. You're entering in competitions. You're a purple belt.
You're moving up.
Yeah, you're doing well. Right. You're thinking like, I might be able to open my own school one day.
You got confidence.
Yeah, if I have 100 students and those 100 students are paying me X amount of dollars per month, I can make a living. Or you could just be playing fucking video games. 3 years later, you could be that same kid just playing video games, waiting for the next whatever the fuck game is, next Xbox game to come out, and you're going to waste your time.
That's sort of the clip that's going to be doing the rounds on Twitter. He then goes on to further clarify what he means in his arguments. I think it's important that we kind of all watch that. So we'll run that clip for you as well, because this one's not doing the rounds in the same way that the first clip is. So that's it now.
Look, I heard the same argument about comedy. My own parents were like, do you know how few people make it as a comedian? I was like, okay. So I figured it out myself. So there was no one telling me I couldn't do it. But there are kids that make a lot of fucking money playing video games. But the thing is, like, you have to be adaptable. You have to be able to play multiple video games, because the one video game that you get really good at, what are the odds that's going to be around 5 years from now?
Right.
Like, what's the big one now? Like Fortnite? Is that? Do they make money off of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's Call of Duty. They make money off that. What's the big money? StarCraft used to be the big one, right?
That, League of Legends, Counter-Strike.
Counter-Strike it's still the Half-Life mod?
Yeah, variations of it have come out.
So look, after you've seen that now you understand a bit more about, I think, what he was trying to say. Now look, yeah. I think ultimately Joe is a pretty smart dude and is pretty well versed on most topics here. And I think here again, he is demonstrating that he understands that, playing games competitively can actually be a thing. He talked about StarCraft, he talks about Counter-Strike. He understands what games are, and he understands that it's an emerging market. But he's really trying to make the point, I think, that it's such a small percentage that people can actually do it. Very much like comedy, where he was also making commentary about comedy. People said he could never do it, and he said, oh, fuck the haters, I'm going to do it anyway. So he kind of is borderline saying, if you really have the chops for it, go and do it. But most people, it's a waste of time. And this is where we think we may disagree with good old Joe.
Yeah, and I think to take a step back a bit, it's important to think about what constitutes a waste of time. I mean, if you're enjoying an activity, is it a waste of time? I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But, commercial gain or commercial opportunities through any given activity, whether it is jiu-jitsu, whether it's, making artwork, whether it's, juicing apples, like
eating at a buffet,
and maybe streaming it. Who knows? If you'd be interested, just maybe like, comment, and subscribe. But what I'm saying is that I don't think that your ability to profit off your interests is inherently what decides whether an activity is worthwhile.
It does.
I think that's the thing that we kind of need to look at. I disagree with that point fundamentally. I have plenty of interests in my life that there's no way I could make a profit from them. But
like modeling. That's one thing.
There's definitely a market for that. What I'm saying, though, is that, all my interests in this life form who I am as a person, Some of those are commercially viable, some of them are not, but they are an indelible part of what I am as a person. And for a lot of people playing video games, that is the activity that sort of shapes them.
Sure.
It shapes their friend groups. It shapes what movies they like to watch.
Their conversations and all that kind of stuff.
What they talk about, the water cooler chat. You can, 20 years ago, it might have been about Seinfeld, world. Now it's about
Horizon Zero Dawn or some shit, right?
some shit like that, you know? It's,
but, yeah.
it's very much part of the general conversation.
Yeah. Look, I also think that maybe Joe is trying to make commentary around people that play games to a point where it becomes unconstructive in other aspects of their life.
Yes.
Now that is something worth discussing. Now, if I'm playing 12 hours a day of a particular game, then I'm trying to juggle my actual workload as well as my social life and my family and this and that. Playing too many games, of course, then gets in the way. But it's the same as playing
If you were to play tennis
all day.
if you did 12 hours,
exactly.
your knees would disappear.
Or
You'd be gone.
Or judo, for instance, when he was also making commentary about, I love doing judo and I may open a judo dojo or some shit, right? There's also a very small percentage of people that do judo that end up opening dojos. So in that capacity, I understand what he may be saying about too much of something is actually bad. And I think he's saying that people find it so fun that they don't want it, like they're not doing many other things.
And I think the last point that's important to touch on is simply the fact that they make a comment about making money in the video game space. You know, that kid is, I think Joe DeSena says, you know, that kid's 1 in a billion. You know, it's really hard for that to happen. Man, like, I don't know, it's an old cliche, but like, if you really want something, just go for it. If you want to be the biggest streamer on Twitch, give it a crack. You know what I mean? If Joe Rogan wanted to be a comedian, he says in that clip that his parents were telling him that he's an idiot for trying because no one makes it in comedy. But he said, you know what? F you, I'm going to go and do it. And look at him now. So I think that kind of defeatist attitude is so strangely applied by Joe Rogan in this instance, because I don't feel like he has that attitude with anything else. And I
that's
think
why I made commentary around that at the beginning. It was weird for, at one moment, he's really saying, people told me I couldn't make it as a comedian. I said, well, fuck you, dude. I'm going to do it anyway. But then he talks about video games like, dude, you guys got to wake up and do something else with your life. You know, and
it's not the first time that video games have been sectioned off into a separate part of these kinds of conversations. You know, it's the old discussion about whether video games are art. And a lot of people, like we talk to, like some of your mates, will insist that video games cannot be art.
I don't come from a friends group or a school, really, actually, that is very, video game driven, that's for sure. And I definitely encounter that a lot, where people are like, games, like, that's a waste of time and whatever, or like, that's silly.
They're not art.
Or even some of them that play are embarrassed of playing. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Who gives a shit? It's the way to pick up the ladies, you know?
So you know, like, video games can't be art, but a song can.
There's a stigma there.
But a film can. But in the case with, gun violence, the old conversation about whether violent video, there's no way that violent films or violent TV shows
or violent music
have anything to do with, gun violence. It must be the video games. It can't be any other form of medium that influences. It's the video games. I think this is another instance of where video games are being pigeonholed into this separate part of the conversation, where everything else that you do, whether it's judo or painting or sculpting or building lights or building a cabinet, is commercially viable and therefore not a waste of time. But video games, they definitely constitute a waste of time.
Yeah, and I think that if we look at the 90s and stuff, when music was also changing, and there was also news anchors going, oh, is this violent kind of new music or something, because there was swearing and whatever, what I mean? Like, they also had their time where society had to kind of adjust to a new type of music. Are we seeing the same thing? It feels like this has been going on for a long time though, because the late 90s, where we're seeing Mortal Kombat on on the news channels saying this should be banned, this is too violent. It's 20, 30 years now, and we're still seeing the same types of conversations. And I think we're still seeing a very similar stigma around video games in general, how it's a waste of time. And then when Joe Rogan gets on there, the biggest voice in podcasting, and one of the biggest voices on YouTube, and one of them, actually, I would say one of the biggest voices on the internet now, coming out and kind of reaffirming that stigma that it's a waste of time and it's silly and whatever, and it's a one in a billion shot, don't even try. That's why we made this episode today, because I think it's quite damaging to actually put that message out there.
I do like Joe Rogan. I think that he's quite refreshing in that there are very few people that will go into certain topics with an open mind.
I agree.
Whether you agree with Joe Rogan or disagree with Joe Rogan, I think it's hard to say about Joe Rogan that he doesn't have an open mind in conversations. I mean, we've all got our biases, but he usually goes into something pretty, one way or the other, and by the end of the discussion, he's learned something. He's willing to change his perspective. That's why I find this to be a weird take from Joe. I'm sure if he spoke to the right people, and here's the thing: if he had Ninja on in the next episode, and they were talking about it for hours, he'd be like, "Wow, that's so fascinating."
Yeah, totally.
I didn't know that. He'd say, "I didn't realize there was so much money in it. Maybe it is good." Blah blah blah. So he's quite malleable in that sense. It's just look. At the end of the day, it's a 40-second clip on the internet. People.
But
say,
Twitter's gonna have their day
exactly.
with it.
Twitter catches that. They cap that screen grab, and then it's perpetuated. So I guess we just kind of wanted to offer our take on that.
It's a 2-hour and 29-minute episode, by the way. So they touch on all sorts of things. And look again,
but we get that 40 seconds.
We get that 40 seconds,
and that's what the internet gets.
But this is why we wanted to make this episode today. You're right. It is a bit of a weird take. I do think that. Maybe after a few people talk about this, that particular idea that he wants to put out next time about games will be slightly different. I just
think Joe needs to play EA Sports UFC. It'll completely change his mind, and he'll be a full-down gamer dude.
He'll be a gamer dude.
It's happening. I can see it.
If there was a weed smoking game, he'd be playing that shit, okay? He would be playing that. But that's it for today, guys. We'll see you. I think Ralph is back tomorrow. Until next time, Laymen out.